Yeah, you can also connect with that in counsels to writers and editors who are also publicly presenting our beliefs. She has a whole chapter, chapter 4, called "Attitude to New Light," and I think it's
Yeah.
beneficial for anybody to read that as well. It's quite interesting what she has to say in regards to that, including statements like, things like, just because we've believed a doctrine for a long time doesn't mean that it's infallible, and that all truth can bear investigation, and we ought to expect more light, and it's quite an interesting chapter.
Well, yes, and
It,
she
it
also
never contradicts the old light, but we should expect new light to be a greater unfolding of the revelation of Jesus Christ.
right, and she actually explains in detail the idea that if someone's sharing something and it's new light to you, then rather than accepting it or rejecting it, you're supposed to go back and study it for yourself.
That's right.
And then if you have a problem, or you see a problem with what someone is presenting, you're supposed to go to that person and share with them what you found, and share to work out what you see as a problem. And then, of course, if you study it and you find out that it's true, and that you see it supported by Scripture, then you're also supposed to go to that person and you're supposed to support them in terms of what they're sharing.
Yeah.
So the idea is that New Light is supposed to draw people to study the Bible, and then it's supposed to bring people together. Even if you disagree, you can totally disagree with what I'm sharing with you, but that means you're supposed to study it from the Bible. Then you're supposed to come and talk to me. And what happens? What's supposed to happen is, as we pray and we study the Bible together, it's supposed to bring us together. I mean, that's how our church was founded.
Yeah.
So her description about how to respond to new light is actually her describing the way the Adventist church came into existence.
That's right. It's purely biblical. And the path of the just shineth brighter and brighter unto the perfect day.
That's
we
right.
haven't reached that perfect day yet, so the light should be shining brighter.
Well, she was asked too, is there any new light? And she said, no, because we haven't made well of the light that we have already had. And the new light is old light that we have not seen. It's just like going through what we're going through right now in Daniel and Revelation.
Yeah.
Right. That the new light is old light in a new setting.
Yes.
By the way, Jesus said the same thing.
Yes. She talks about how Jesus presented many things that seemed like new light to the people of his day, because he was just taking the old truths and presenting them so clearly and plainly. And it was at such variance from what had come to be believed that it seemed like radical new light.
So that's basically what I wanted to share with you tonight, is that, when the books of Daniel and the book of Revelation, by the way, what's beautiful about it is that as you're studying the book of Revelation, and you have this mindset, you start seeing what you used to see before, but then you see it in a different light. And as soon as you see the book of Revelation in a different light, then you'll start seeing the book of Daniel in a new light. And then it starts ping-ponging back and forth. You see Daniel in a new light, and all of a sudden you get thoughts you never saw before, and all of a sudden you'll see Revelation, and it just builds on each other, and you'll start seeing this connection back and forth, and you begin to understand why God told Daniel that knowledge would increase and men would run to and fro. The idea they would run to and fro, that's back and forth through Scripture, back and forth through the book of Daniel, or through the book of Revelation, or through the books of the Bible. And you start putting things together, and all of a sudden, the synapses start firing, and all of a sudden your mind's just flooded with all this. Oh, you start seeing it everywhere. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of the picture right there. Because when you start seeing it everywhere, then you know that you're beginning to start to see it. So, questions, comments? I can get out of the PowerPoint if you'd like. I just wanted to give you something to look at in terms of the sevens, and then in Revelation chapter 1 that connect to Daniel 7, 13, and 14. I've shared some of that with you before, but it's for those who haven't not perhaps heard that then.
I think it's, this whole idea that there's the Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles are the two feasts that haven't yet fulfilled. Well, and the Day of Atonement has partially begun to fulfill an antitype, but the closing scenes haven't happened yet. And we still have the antitypical Feast of Tabernacles, blending together with it now. And it's interesting how our partial historical understanding of things like the seals and the trumpets says we've gotten through 6, but the 7th, we haven't gotten to the 7th yet. So there's this kind of, transition or delay between the 6th and the 7th. And, what really did it for me was in the story of Joshua 6, in the taking of Jericho. They they circle the city once each day, blowing the trumpets, and then they go back into the camp, and they do that for 6 days. And, there's 6 blowing of the trumpet, and it comes time to blow the 7th trumpet, as it were. And what should have they done? They would have circled the city once, blowing trumpets. But instead, they circled the city 7 times. So it's like the first 6 repeat very rapidly all at once when it comes time for the blowing of the 7th trumpet. And I think that's how I see it. We've got these partial historical fulfillments that we've thought of and we've taught and believed that have validity. But now, as the time comes for the 7th part that brings it all together, in the book of Revelation, the first 6 will repeat rapidly this idea of bringing it back, bring it to pass shortly. That there's this repetition of the pattern that we see historically, all happening at the end. And that's part of the 7th step that brings it to completion.
Right. And I would say it further that actually, when you begin to look at the way that we've explained Revelation in the past, and basically we follow the pattern of the 7 churches. So the Church of Ephesus is the apostolic church, leads you up to around 300 AD. Then we have the Church of Smyrna, and then of course that's the 10-year persecuted church, usually the persecution of Diocletian around 303 to 313, and then you go from Smyrna, you go to Pergamos, and then that's the Constantine, the beginning of bringing in the paganism and all that, and then of course you go to Thyatira, and that's the Dark Ages and the Catholicism and the talking about the woman. And then of course you go from there. When you go to Sardis, then you're dealing with the Church of the Reformation. Then Philadelphia, that's 10-year church. That's the Church of the of William Miller and beginning of the Advent movement. Then Church of Laodicea. That's from around 1850 or 60s or so to today. That's the format of the 7 churches. And then what we have done, if we tried to squeeze the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets and all this other stuff into the same process. But when you actually look at the book of Revelation and you look at what it says, then you realize that you can't fit the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets. You can't fit them in that correlation. It doesn't work. I mean, if you hold fast to that setting as an interpretation, then you have the 144,000, the great multitude, are already sealed in the time of the Church of Philadelphia, before Laodicea even shows up. That's the 6th seal. And so if you're looking at the 7 seals to repeat the 7 churches, then you're saying that the sounding of the 7th trumpet, which is silence in heaven for half an hour, well, that's the Church of Laodicea. And then everything else has already happened. Well, of course, no evidence would tell you that the 144,000 are already sealed and that's already happened. That's not. Any evidence will tell you that's still future. So therefore, the 6th seal is still future. Well, if the 6th seal is the Church of Philadelphia, the 6th church, then that can't be true. So something's wrong. Something's wrong with the paradigm that you're imposing on the book of Revelation. And so yes, I'm not trying to throw away any partial truths that we've seen from replaying the history, but the point is when you take seriously looking at the parts of Revelation and trying to understand their meaning, then and you start realizing right away that we're superimposing something on it, on the book of Revelation that doesn't fit. And so then it should cause us to step back and say, well, what is the structure? What biblical structure can we place Revelation under that helps it make sense? And
Yeah.
that's where, when you begin to study the Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles, then you begin to see the structure that governs the book of Revelation, and then it actually totally makes sense. And there's no confusing, and there's no contrasting with it either. That's the part that I'm excited about.
Right after the seventh church, at the end of chapter 3, the first verse in chapter 4 says, "After this."
Yeah. Right.
Not going back to the beginning of this, but after this.
Yeah. Because Laodicea is not the last church. There's the 7th and the 8th. And of course, that's a theme throughout the book of Revelation as well that we'll get into later. But yes. So the point here is that it's time, some of these things we've washed over because there's certain texts that we've grabbed hold of to say that this text applies, this text applies. I'm talking about the sixth seal, so I can continue to talk about the sixth seal. It talks about the earthquake, and it talks about the falling of the stars, and it talks about, and we've always attributed that reference to the Lisbon earthquake and the dark day of 1780 and the falling of the stars in 1833, and we've always seen, well, those are fulfillments of the dark day and the falling of stars and all that stuff in the sixth seal. Well, no, those are only partial fulfillments. The actual fulfillment of the darkness that's coming and the falling of the stars and all that the actual fullness of that is still in front of us. But anyway,
I think the great shaking has started.
oh yeah, well,
But that's
I know.
that's the first of the signs.
Yeah. Well, there's more to come. Because, yeah. Well, that's part of what we need to dig into the book of Revelation to understand. Yes. So anyways.
Excuse me, can I ask a question?
Sure.
You just mentioned this is the first time that I hear that there are 8 churches, and that after Laodicea there is another one. So I know that you're going to explain in the future, but can you just give us just a taste of what is the
Sure.
8th church? Thank you so much.
Sure. Welcome, by the way. Yeah, so in Revelation chapter 1, you have 7 churches, right? And I mentioned them, Ephesus and Smyrna and Pergamos and Thyatira and Sardis and Philadelphia and Laodicea. But who's walking amongst the 7 golden lampstands?
Jesus.
Jesus. So isn't Jesus, so the 7 churches are of Jesus, right? The reflection of Jesus.
Yes.
So there's 7 churches, but he's the 8th. And the 8th is always the completion of all the 7. So there's the 7, but there's really 8. Does that make sense?
Wow.
Now the same thing, this is going to be played, the same thing is going to happen in Revelation 17 when it talks about the harlot rides this beast, and that this beast has 7 heads, right?
Yes.
But then it says that the beast is of the 7, but he's the 8th. So you see it in the positive, and then you also see it in the negative, that the idea is that the 7 churches individually are 7 churches, but they're supposed to combine to reflect the character of Christ, which is the 8th. Same thing happens in Revelation 17 with the kingdom of Satan. Of course, Satan's always mimicking God's kingdom. So you see the 7-headed dragon, but the beast himself is the 8th because it's the culmination of the 7. So it's the same idea. The 8 is always the maturing of the 7.
Wow.
So that's where the number 8 comes from. So that's why I say that there's 7. Actually, there's 8 churches. Now, you could also say the same thing, is that there's 7 churches, ends with Laodicea, but the 8th church would be the 144,000. Of course, that's the same thing that I've just said, because Jesus walks among the 144,000, Revelation 14. So you have the 7, but then you have the 8th. And the eighth is always Christ, the revelation, the full revelation of Christ.
Thank you so much for the answer. Wow.
Really,
Interesting.
the fateful remnant of the seven,
Yeah.
who's actually connected with the true King.
Well, we just celebrated Easter, right? So the idea here is that we know that the seventh day is the Sabbath. So you have the week of Christ's ministry, his final week, he's the seventh, and he rests on the Sabbath. But the eighth day is resurrection. So the eighth is always connected to the full revelation of Christ. Now I know that I'm get some Adventists upset when I'm talking about the first day of the week being the completion, but you get the idea that the resurrection of Christ actually happens on the eighth day. And there, the number 8 is connected to the fullness of the revelation. That's why in the book of Revelation, I mentioned before, if you go back to read listen to the introductory comments I made, when we were talking about the sevens throughout the book of Revelation, the word Almighty is actually mentioned 8 times. So there's 8 mentions of God, or 8 mentions of Christ in different places that actually describe him in his fullness. So the 7 is a sacred number, but of course then there's the 8. By the way, the Feast of Tabernacles that we're talking about also has this attribute. Remember, Jesus in John chapter 7 and 8, actually 7, 8, 9, all and 10 all go through the Feast of Tabernacles. And then the Feast of Tabernacles lasts 7 days, but actually lasts 8 days. And then there's 7. Then the 8th day is the great day of the feast. So the Feast of Tabernacles has this connotation of 8 parts.
Yes.
So
Eighth day is connected with the circumcision as well.
So the Bible has this pattern. Of course, we've been talking about eternal gospel. So you see this pattern throughout the book of Revelation that is highlighted by this number system. And of course, you're dealing with the great numberer himself. So you're going to see this stuff in many places. So that's a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.